Hi, I'm Yukiko. Thanks for coming. I'm really happy that so many people wanted to hear this story. Usually my dad would do this whole entire talk, and I think for 30 or 35 years he would do this at different schools and libraries, community centers. And he's 92 now, and he's in a memory care facility, and so just recently I've started doing the talk, telling his story. But I do have 5 clips that are 2 minutes, so you do get to hear his voice and kind of get a feel for him telling the stories. This is a picture of my dad, and this is Roosevelt High School has a program, and they interviewed him. And then they put this together, and I thought it was so great because it was kids that interviewed him, and then they wrote like a paper on the story. And I just think it's great how they put this quote, "It's not what you look like, it's what you have inside." And it's such an easy way to think of it, and such an important lesson for all of us. The name internment camp is always what these camps have been called, and it's been through this kind of morphing, and sometimes people call it concentration camp, but in my mind that brings like death camp things to mind, so I think it's more true to say that the Japanese Americans were incarcerated in internment camps. Because if you just say internment camps, it doesn't sound quite as harsh. And it was pretty harsh. And so that's one thing that recently I've learned a lot more about how people are kind of changing the name. And I remember when my dad was talking about these and he would say concentration camps, I would just be like, "Dad, you're making it so much worse. It wasn't a concentration camp." But then the more I learned about it and the more I realized that in his mind it was like prison. And so he says, "Well, the definition of concentration camp, that was it." So anyway, that's just the story kind of about the name. And when people talk about it now, you might hear people using different names. And that's a lot of what it is. People that don't want it to sound like it wasn't that bad. If people say, "Oh, the Japanese were in internment camps," it's much softer than the Japanese were incarcerated in internment camps.
Said every time I spoke to a group, I always told them that I'm an American, I've been in the Army, and I'm proud to be an American, and I've been to Japan, and it's still the best place to live. And I'm going to say some things that Americans did that were wrong, but just remember that I'm still loyal to America. So. Probably the only one that really talked publicly about the camps, and most of the people really didn't talk too much about it. They say it's an experience that you should forget about, and so a lot of them didn't talk about it. That's why they're having these interviews like this, because a lot of people don't know, and especially the kids. A lot of the kids don't know about it, so it's an experience that they need to learn about.
Why did you personally decide to begin talking about your experience?
I think when I did the civil rights thing, it gave me the incentive to educate people on my experience.
So when he says, "I've been to Japan and it's the best place to live," he means like America is the best place to live. He just didn't put that little phrase in. But he visited Japan and he wanted to make sure everybody knows, I am an American and this is the best place. The second little segment that he was talking, he has a really big family, and he is the only one out of his siblings that would talk about this. And it was very unusual for people in that generation to explain what happened because it was so painful. And especially, like, he was in middle school when he went to this camp. And so for him, he didn't really lose that much. You know, his father had a farm, a house, you know, had built a business, and then it's a completely different scenario. So for my dad to tell his story is really different than older people who went through this. So a lot of times the parents didn't explain details to the younger this. So a lot of times the parents didn't explain details to the younger kids, and that's what he was talking about. A lot of people haven't told the story. So if you find someone who's, say, 80, or they were born in the camp, or they might have a really different knowledge of what happened, depending on what their parents felt like explaining.
Yukiko, where was he in birth order? Because you said he had
He was the 8th son, 9th kid.
Okay, wow.
9 boys and 2 girls. So this is a picture of the house. These are my uncles. But I like to explain, in 1924, there was also a really interesting immigration policy that my grandmother didn't really want to come to America, but my grandfather convinced her that he can get rich and then they can go back to Okinawa. And so they came here. I think they had 4 kids, and then they went back to Okinawa, and then they decided, oh, actually, the kids aren't blending in very well here. They speak Japanese, but they don't speak it as fluently, and they have American culture in them, and so then they decided, let's go back to America, and the kids will be happier, and then they had a bunch of more kids. This was the picture of the day that Japan bombed America in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor, and now I'm going to show a video of my dad's experience when that happened.
I guess my first experience of prejudice was, in 1941, December 7th, 1941. That's when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And on Friday, everybody in school was my friend. And Pearl Harbor was on a Sunday. When I went back to school on Monday, 2 of my friends were the only ones that would talk to me, the only ones that would go to recess with me, the only ones that would eat lunch with me. Now, when you're in grammar school and that happened to you, that prejudice is very, very, that was my first, I didn't know what prejudice was when you were in grammar school. And so all those parents must have told their kids that I was the enemy because of Pearl Harbor. Now to me, I still remember that so vividly. I still remember my 2 friends, John Corbin and Pete Masters. And that's what you call a true friend. And I still know them now. Isn't that amazing? So that's my first experience of prejudice. My second real bad experience of prejudice was when we came back after the camp, came back to Azusa, because we had a home to come back to. And when we came back, there was only one market that would even sell us food. All the rest of the markets had no Japs allowed. And the reason that Safeway, the manager knew us, and they, sold some of our produce. So the manager says, yeah, we'll sell you food, So we could have starved there to look for that one market and that person, that thing. So to me, that's prejudice. And all the stores had no Japs allowed. Couldn't go to a movie.
This is after
right after the war. War was done. They still had all these signs, no Japs allowed. So that's the 2 things that I really remember of prejudice.
So how did that make you feel?
pretty rotten because, see, when I got out, I graduated grammar school in camp, and I was a freshman in high school, and I was getting into fights every day because they would call me a dirty Jap, a sneaky Jap, a yellow Jap, you know. And when I heard Jap, to me, that's derogatory.
I feel for my dad, and if he was here, you know, he's such a great storyteller, and everybody would just be dying laughing because, you know, he would explain what happened, and 10 people would jump on me. Anyway, that the fact that he can now look back on that and laugh at it and smile about it really goes to show his character and how he didn't become. So this is the notification. It came on a big piece of paper, and they put this notification on telephone poles, on all government buildings, libraries, and it was giving instructions for anyone who was up to 1/16 Japanese to report to a certain place at a certain time. So it was the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California. It was not any Japanese Americans on the East Coast, just the West Coast and Hawaii. And Hawaii is an interesting story because there were a lot of Japanese in Hawaii, and they could not put all of the Japanese into isolation because the economy would crash. And so the government decided, we'll just go take the leaders of the Japanese community and put them in camp. And so lots of community leaders, you know, lots of fathers, husbands were taken away from their families. But it wasn't as big as it was in Oregon, Washington, and California. So my dad's family, they went to Assembly Center in Pomona. So this is just a sign of one example of someone who owned a business. And a lot of the Japanese had never even been in Japan. You know, they spent their whole entire life in America. And so it really felt terrible for them to be lumped in with, you know, people were saying maybe there were spies among the Japanese community. And they never found any evidence. There was zero information ever turned up that anyone who was a Japanese American or any Japanese living in America did anything having to do with the war. So they had to sell everything, you know, or give it away. You know, and it's, you can imagine that people were just getting things, you know, pennies to the dollar, really bitter and angry about what happened. And it's interesting because a lot of Japanese Americans have that mentality. Like, you don't hold on to anger and resentment, just forgive and make the best of the next day, you know, try to look forward.
So I was in fights. And in camp I learned judo, so one-on-one I did real good. But when 10 people jump on you, there's nothing you could do. So we had about less than 2 weeks to take care of everything and go to Pomona Assembly Center. And the farm was in my brother's name. He was an American citizen, so they didn't take it away from us. But it was in my father's name, which some of them they were not allowed to even buy property, see? But some of them did anyway. And they lost everything. But we didn't lose anything. We still had a farm. We still had a home. So that's basically what happened. And for myself, my mother said, you can only take what you can carry, so a suitcase. So you just take clothes. That's all you can take. No toys, you know, no bikes, no nothing. And you couldn't take any pets, no dogs or cats or anything. So that kind of made me sad because, you know, kind of get attached to a dog and a cat, you know, a pet in the house. It was amazing. We had a cat we call her Mama Kitty, because every year she would have a litter of kittens. So she was Mama Kitty. That's her name, Mama Kitty. Isn't that crazy? And so what I did was, I like marbles, so I hid a bunch of marbles in the pockets of my pants. So that was the only toy I took to camp. If you call that a toy, I don't know if it's a toy or not. That's just my own personal experience of what I did, and the adults, you know, they had other things. You can go any place, you know.